Hey everyone, welcome. If you're gearing up for the CSIR-NET Life Science exam, you know that understanding how energy moves through an ecosystem isn't just a side topic, it's absolutely fundamental. So today, we're diving deep into trophic dynamics, breaking down everything from the simple food chains we learned in school to the intricate, complex webs that truly define life. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll kick things off by tracing energy's journey, starting with the super simple linear food chain. Then we'll hit a really important concept, the 10% rule, which acts as a major bottleneck. After that, we'll zoom out to the much more realistic and tangled food web. And finally, we'll get into some high-level concepts and wrap it all up with the core takeaways you need for the exam. All right, let's get right into it. When you boil it all down, a huge part of ecology is really about answering one simple but massive question. Where does all the energy for life come from? I mean, really think about that for a second. How does the energy captured by a plant from the sun end up powering a lion on the savanna? Well, there's a whole science dedicated to mapping that incredible journey. It's called trophic dynamics, and it all begins with a very straightforward idea. Okay, so let's look at our first model. To really understand the complex stuff, you've got to master the simple stuff first. And in ecology, the simplest model for how energy flows is the food chain. So, the most important phrase to lock onto here is linear sequence. A food chain is just a straight line. It's one single pathway showing who eats whom. Think of it as the basic building block for understanding all of this. In pretty much every food chain follows this classic structure. You start with producers, your plants basically, creating their own food from sunlight. They get eaten by primary consumers, who are the herbivores. Then, those guys get eaten by secondary consumers, the carnivores, who might then get eaten by a tertiary consumer, the top dog. It's just a simple, step-by-step transfer of energy. Now, here's where it gets a little more interesting. Not all food chains actually start with living plants. The one we usually think of, the grazing food chain, or GFC, is your classic grass to gazelle to lion scenario. But there's a whole other system, the detritus food chain, or DFC. This one starts with dead stuff, like fallen leaves and dead animals, and it's actually the main energy pathway in ecosystems like forests. It plays a huge role in recycling nutrients. All right, this next part is huge for the CSIR-NET. Seriously, the examiners love this concept. It's all about a major limitation on how energy gets transferred. Think of it as a fundamental bottleneck in every single ecosystem. But before we get to the rule itself, let's just make sure we're all on the same page with the lingo. Each of those steps we talked about, producer, primary consumer, and so on, is called a trophic level. So this table is just mapping those roles onto their level. It's kind of like a ladder that energy has to climb. And this number, this is the reason that ladder is so incredibly short. On average, only about 10% of the energy from one trophic level actually gets converted into biomass at the next level up. Just 10%. That is a wildly inefficient transfer. So if only 10% makes it, where in the world does the other 90% go? Does it just vanish? Nope. This is what Lindemann's 10% law explains. Most of it is lost as heat from metabolic processes, or it's used by the organism just to stay alive, respiration. Plus, not everything gets eaten, and not everything that is eaten gets fully digested. It doesn't disappear, it's just used up or lost along the way. And here is the so what for your exam. This is a golden nugget of information. Because of this massive energy loss at every step, there's just not enough energy left to support a 5th or 6th trophic level. The energy literally runs out. That's why you don't see food chains that are 10 steps long. It's a fundamental law of energy transfer. Okay, so the food chain is a great starting point, a fantastic teaching tool, but let's be real. Nature is messy. It's almost never a simple straight line. So it's time to move from that line to a much more realistic, tangled network. So what are the big problems with just sticking to the food chain model? Well, for starters, it's just way too simple. I mean, think about it. A fox doesn't only eat rabbits. And what about a bear that eats berries and fish? It's operating at multiple trophic levels at the same time. The simple chain model just can't capture that kind of complexity or the true stability of an ecosystem. And that's where the food web comes in to save the day. A food web isn't a single line. It's what you get when you take a bunch of food chains and weave them all together. It shows that energy flows through multiple, interconnected, branching pathways. This is a much more accurate picture of what's really happening out there. All right, now that we have a feel for the complexity of a food web, we can get into some of the really juicy advanced concepts. You'll want to dial in for this because these ideas are prime material for those tricky analytical questions you find in Part C of the exam. First up, we have the keystone species. Now, this isn't always the biggest or most common animal out there. Instead, its impact on the ecosystem is huge, way bigger than you'd expect from its numbers. It's just like the keystone in a stone arch. If you pull that one stone out, the whole arch can come crashing down. And the absolute classic example, the one you have to remember, is the sea otter. By eating sea urchins, a relatively small number of otters keep the urchin population in check. This prevents the urchins from just completely wiping out the kelp forests, which are home to countless other species. So you see, if you take the otters away, the whole system just unravels. Okay, next up we have the trophic cascade. This is basically a domino effect. It's what happens when you add or remove a top predator. Their actions don't just affect their immediate prey. The effects cascade or ripple all the way down the food web, changing things 2 or 3 levels below them. And the poster child for this concept? It has to be the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park. The wolves hunted elk, so the elk population went down. With fewer elk constantly grazing, the willows and aspen trees along the river started to grow back. This stabilized the riverbanks, which provided habitats for beavers and other animals. It changed the entire landscape, even the physical path of the rivers themselves. It's a perfect example of a top-down effect. All right, let's pull all of this together. Think of this as our final review, where we're going to consolidate these ideas into some crystal clear points that you can take with you right into your exam prep. This table right here, this is your golden ticket. It lays out the differences perfectly. A food chain is linear, a single path, which makes it unstable and pretty simplistic. A food web, on the other hand, is a network with tons of pathways, which makes it way more stable and much more realistic. The key takeaway is that more connections generally lead to more stability. And to wrap it all up, here are the absolute must-know tips for exam day. 1. Never, ever forget that energy decreases as you move up the trophic levels. 2. On the flip side, biomagnification, the buildup of toxins, increases as you move up. 3. Be ready for applied questions like, what happens if we remove this species? And finally, make sure you can think through a trophic cascade problem from top to bottom.
So I'll leave you with one last thing to chew on. We've said that a complex food web with high connectance is more stable. But is it truly immune to collapse? Could taking out just one super-connected species still bring the whole thing crashing down? That's the kind of deeper question that ecologists grapple with every day, and it's a great thought to keep in mind as you continue your study.